All right, well, I'm here at the 2025 Claremont Institute Statesmanship Award Day ceremony, soon to come, with none other than John Eastman of the Claremont Institute itself. So good to see you again. It's been a good weekend.
It's been a good weekend thus far, and we're looking forward to the dinner tonight.
Yes, and the dinner tonight celebrates statesmanship, which is this word that I'm asking everyone, connotation in people's mind sounds good. We need more of that. But what the hell that is, other than the guys who we see in the statues, is a little bit murky, I think, to a lot of people these days. So what the heck is statesmanship?
Well, statesmanship is understanding the right course and pursuing it with the art of the possible, or the art of what's prudent. The full name of the Claremont Institute is the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy. The political philosophy teaches you what the right course is. Statesmanship, and the great statesmen we have as our models, Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, understood how best to achieve those fundamental truths, those principles, given the circumstances, the hand they're dealt with, as you will. Churchill once famously said, somebody said, well, you used to be liberal, now you're conservative. He said, well, yeah, but I've always been aiming at the same point on the shore. And depending what the winds and the currents are, I have to tack one way or another. Knowing what to tack, knowing when to tack and how to tack to achieve the ultimate purpose and the truth is the art of statesmanship.
So what is the ultimate purpose? And what's the goal?
Well, the ultimate purpose, I think, is most eloquently laid out in our Declaration of Independence. We begin with a couple of fundamental propositions and truths. All men, all human beings are created equal. They're endowed by their creator, not by any government, with fundamental inalienable rights. And the purpose of government is to secure those rights. Because we're all equal, that government, in order to be just or legitimate, has to be based on the consent of the governed. And when they cease to accomplish the purpose of securing us in our individual, unalienable, God-given rights, we have a right to alter that government to do better. And so the goal is to ensure our happiness, our safety, our prosperity, our unalienable rights based on consent of the governed. That's the goal. And how we achieve that goal at any given moment, that's the essence of statesmanship.
So the problem of statesmanship then in America would be you have to get the consent of the governed, right? Which we don't want to get rid of. We like that. We like the consent of the governed.
It's better than the alternative.
But you have to obtain that in some way. And so there, I kind of think of today's world in which so many people, just look at the polls, right? They know that they don't have statesmen. They don't have people who are leading them correctly. They understand that there's a lot of corruption in America. Most widely shared fear in America for over 10 years is the corruption of government officials. So people understand that. So how do you do that? I mean, what's the difference between someone who obtains the consent of the governed by doing what the media does, by whatever means necessary, by lying and propaganda, and the person who truly does?
Well, Jefferson spoke about this or wrote about it. He said, in America, the majority is always to rule, but for the majority to be rightful, for the majority to prevail, it should be rightful. I destroyed his quotation, and much more eloquent. We're not a democracy. This is, one of the fundamental fallacies of the modern discourse. We're not a democracy. The founders viewed raw democracy as dangerous as monarchy or despotism or aristocracy, because in fact, in many ways, it's a greater danger, because a majority bent on destroying the individual rights of members of a minority, they have the political power in being the majority. And so ours is a constitutional republic. It constrains the majority when they cease to act rightful, when they cease to act for the common good and are instead acting for their own good to the expense of others. Statesmen come along rarely, unfortunately, but at critical moments to not just lead, but to instruct public opinion to follow that notion that our founders bequeathed to us of unalienable rights, of securing those rights, of a government that is designed to further those rights, even against the will of the majority when it acts wrongly.
So the statesman has to, as a way, it's sort of educate in a way, or guide the people towards the right opinion, no matter what.
And then demonstrate through his own actions or her own actions the success of that possibility. I mean, look, Great Britain stood up against Nazi Germany almost alone on the world stage because of the force of Churchill's will and encouragement to the people to understand the stakes of what was involved. Franklin Roosevelt, our own president at the time, kind of our first socialist president, but on this issue, he was absolutely right. He violated the law and launched munitions manufacturing and violated the Neutrality Act because he understood if Churchill wasn't successful in Great Britain, we would no longer be protected here either. And so he did that before the representatives of the people in Congress had come to the same realization that he saw. So Lincoln does the same thing, right? I mean, Lincoln understands the importance of protecting the Union, even against the assault that the Confederate States made against it, because if you destroy the Union, you then create on our shores a government perpetually hostile to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and you create a house divided here on our shores that could not stand. Even 70 years later, the Western European powers still didn't think we'd succeed long term, and they were salivating for this split. Mm-hmm. Lincoln understood that before most people did, and statesman is then to deal with those questions in a prudent way at the moment, but also to educate his fellow citizens to come on board. Because ultimately, if you don't accomplish that last mission, you will be unsuccessful in the broader mission.
So why is it that there's so few of these people? Because there's a lot of people in the audience who they pray for these kinds of leaders, right? They want to see more of this sort of leadership, but they know things are very corrupt. People are very corrupt. Why are they so rare?
Well, that's a little above my pay grade. You may have to ask God the Almighty that question on why so few. But look, human nature is itself sinful, right? Human nature always is self-interested. It's rare that you find somebody that's willing to rise above that or able, constitutionally, small c, able to rise above that. I was recently reminded of a toast that somebody gave in support of one of our old professors, William Allen, who's a scholar of George Washington. And he was asked the question, why do we revere Washington so much? In this era when all the other founders are being denigrated, well, Jefferson owned slaves. I mean, Washington owned slaves too, but you don't see the attacks on Washington. And Bill responded, because he gave everything and asked for nothing in return. A statesman understands that at critical times, the country's interest, the broader interest, the more noble interest, has to prevail even over your own self-interest. And it's rare the person that can do that.
Well, we wish there were more of them. And I guess one could also ask, okay, so they're going to be rare because, look, great people are rare. And we celebrate them and they get the statues accordingly. All right. But we still have the question of how we form them and how we ought to look for them in today's day and age, because everyone knows that we need them.
Well, we need them, but here's the danger. Somebody that's great enough to be an eagle is also great enough to be a lion. And that means you have to form their character, their soul, in order to make sure that they don't take the power that comes with greatness and abuse it for their own purposes. That's a hard thing to do. We at the Claremont Institute have gotten very good at that. So I would encourage anybody in your audience that doesn't know who we are to read up about us. If they're young, to apply for our fellowship programs. They're soul formation fellowships, but they're not theological. They're natural rights, or to use the language of the Declaration, they're rooted deeply in the laws of nature and of nature's God.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, how has Claremont been able to select so many incredible young people? You've been running the John Marshall Fellowship with legal minds, lawyers, for a long time. You've been a part of this for a long time. What's the secret to finding all these people who, we should brag a little bit, who are all over this administration? I mean, your students, people they're all over the Trump administration. What was the secret to finding these people?
Well, you begin with intellectual capability, but there are a lot of people that are intellectually capable that can't pull this off. You have to then look for intellectual curiosity. you've got to look for a Socratic humility. I know what I don't know, and I want to come out and figure that out. A great example of this was Janice Rogers Brown, former California Supreme Court Justice, ultimately D.C. Circuit Judge, and very considered a front runner for a U.S. Supreme Court slot in her day. And she realized
an incredible person.
An incredible person. She now teaches in our fellowship program with me. But she realized at one point that she didn't know much about the principles of the American founding. She knew the history like everybody did, but she didn't know the deep principles of it. And so she went and got a new degree studying the principles of the American founding. You need that level of curiosity because we're not providing students in our educational system with anything remotely comparable to what our forebears got. And the mission of the Institute's fellowships is to, in a compressed way, give them an inkling of the noble thoughts that are there that they can then study and advance. And you have to have both the capability, the intellectual horsepower to do that, but also the curiosity to sustain it.
Well, I just thank God I'm part of these programs, and it's been a real a privilege to see, just in the short time I've been involved, what's been accomplished over the years because of the work of you and others. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this year's Statesmanship Award. Claremont gives this out not every year anymore. This isn't because there's not that many of them. So JD Vance, I mean, people could say, well, he's, there's no bigger fan than me, but I'm playing devil's advocate. Someone could say, well, JD Vance is very young, and how can you give a Statesmanship Award to someone so young?
So JD Vance a few months ago gave a speech in Germany that challenged our NATO allies to stop their decline in denialism that is going to destroy Western civilization. And that speech has already had a profound impact. It probably was more responsible for the success of the conservative candidate in the Polish elections than anything else. And if the decline in the West is going to be stopped, if the hemorrhaging there is going to stop, it's because of that speech. He didn't have to give that speech. And I'll guarantee you some of the rank and file folks over at State Department were going apoplectic over it, just like they did when Ronald Reagan insisted on including the line in his speech that calling the Soviets an evil empire or telling them to tear down the Berlin Wall. I mean, you could just see the little bureaucrats at the State Department turning blue in the face over those things. But we understand that Reagan was a statesman because he understood the significance of that. And it's that same understanding of the significance of those words and those challenges that J.D. Vance brought to the table in that speech. And I think that's why we're confident, even though he's young and even though he's at the beginning of what will likely be a very prominent and successful career for our country, that we're confident in giving him the award.
JD Vance, incredible talent. The always talented John Eastman, great to have you here. We look forward to dinner tonight.
Thank you very much.